through the entire book. And we're going to get through it all. So chapter 5. Chapter 5, the theme is keep your promise to God. And your promise to God is that you're going to let him be God. That's our promise to God. And so what we have to realize in chapter 5 and 6, it's such an important lesson, is God wants what's best for us. He honestly wants what's best for us. You know, you have to say this to your kids all the time, don't you? When they ask, why do I have to do this? Well, it's what's best for you. And they have to trust that you as a parent, you're doing this because you know what's best for them, and you love them, and you want what's best for them. Well, guess what? God is that way for us. That's the only way we learn to be that way. God wants what's best for us. It's only logical. And this is so critical to their theology. So starting in verse 8, he gets back on riches being meaningless again. He says, suppose you see poor people being mistreated somewhere, and what's being done to them isn't right, and it's not fair. Don't be surprised by that, Solomon says. Yeah, we live in a broke world. One official is watched by a higher one. Officials who are even higher are watching both of them. There's corruption. People want money, and that's driving everything, and the love of it is the root of all evil. And so what we learn from this is God is telling us wealth isn't what's best for us. He's not saying it's bad, but it's not what's best for us. God is what's best for us. And if he throws wealth in with it, well, glory be. But wealth is not what's best for us. Dave Ramsey has this thing. He was I got to hear him speak recently, and he said...
You guys listen to Dave Ramsey? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and he says money makes you more of what you already are. When you get wealth, it just makes you more of whatever you already are. And this is really pointed out here in this passage, because we find out that selfish people, the one official that's watching the higher one, and there's the corruption, and they're all going for more and more money. If you're a selfish person, money cultivates greed in you.
If you look at verse 9, it says, all of them take what the land produces, and the king himself takes his share of the field. So kind of this idea of money grows entitlement in people who are already proud. Just makes you more of what you already are. 10 says, anyone who loves money never has enough. Anyone who loves wealth is never satisfied with what they get. Money fosters ingratitude in ambitious people.
12 says, the sleep of a worker is sweet. It doesn't matter whether they eat a little or a lot. But the wealth of rich people keeps them awake at night. So in anxious people, money just nurtures stress.
Verse 13 says, I've seen something very evil on earth. It's when wealth is stored up and then brings harm to its owners. It's also when wealth is lost because of an unwise business deal. Then there won't be anything left for the owner's children. So ultimately, money accomplishes nothing of eternal consequence. It's what you do with those resources instead, and kids need to understand that.
That's a very countercultural message to give kids, that money does not accomplish anything eternal, because, people talk about the dynasty they leave after themselves, and whatever they're going to leave, and all this that their money's going to do, but it doesn't do anything eternally, honestly. And kids need to understand that. It's good for things here, and it's good to be used here. And so some of the strategies we want to give you to help you with helping kids to understand that wealth isn't what's best for them. So some of the things we've done is when we started paying our kids allowance, and by the way, it's always for stuff they do. It's not just we give you money for living and breathing in this house. But we paid it to them specifically in denominations of quarters at first, so that they could divide it up easily. They've got the envelope system, So if I'm paying you $1 for making sure that you had your room clean and your bed made and all that stuff or whatever, we give you 4 quarters, and one is going to go in your God envelope, and one is going to go into your, they're too young to understand percentages, so they don't need to know it's, 25 cents is more than, 10%. But, the God envelope and the saving envelope and the spending envelope, and we've actually added another one called a gift envelope. And so because they're going to have to buy gifts, and so we make that an important thing.
And as they got older and the amount of money they got increased, we just always paid them in dollar bills so they could easily divide that up. And I would encourage you, and my mom did this for us, so maybe that's why I'm encouraging you to do it. I feel like it worked. She would just open up her checkbook and she would show me, this goes here, this goes here, this goes here. This is what we're spending our money on. This is how much comes in. I mean, she just was always very transparent, that's the word I'm looking for, with her finances. And I saw her struggle, and she'd be like, I remember one time we needed $1,300 to fix the car, and we didn't have it, but we just had to go and I don't even remember how we got it all together, but I just remember learning the value of the money and where it was coming from. And share your budget with them. And if you have a budget, our whole church, come on in, you're good. Our whole church is doing Financial Peace University, and so actually on a napkin, on the airline on the way here, we started making out our budget, which is not a fun thing necessarily, unless you're one of those people who likes doing that. But share that with the kids and show them how you're allotting a certain amount for different things in your life.
And then, they do get entitled, don't they, from time to time? And so I'll never forget this. We have this weekly routine where we sit down with the kids. They've got this, talk a little, well, I don't know if we'll have time later, but they have a chore chart. And it says, these are the things that they're going to do this week. We sit down and we write down, you're going to do these things this week. And at the end of the week, we'd say...
A lot of them are just repeat things. Yeah. Sometimes I have to throw in extra
And so it's like, so you get $1 for doing this, $1 for doing that, or whatever. And then our daughter, our eldest, Emma, kind of had this about a year ago, not even a year ago, came to us with sort of this entitled attitude of saying, I just wish I could get a job because I got friends and they're making a lot more money than I'm making here. We're like,
I said, you won't even work for me. Why are you going to go work for me?
Exactly. We said, now time out. And she goes, yeah, like she makes $10 an hour. And we were like, you don't even work a full hour a week. And she was like, sure I do. And we said, okay, how about this? Here's what we're going to do. We are going to pay you $12 an hour to do all of your work. And they were like, cool.
Like,
and then we said, all right, so let's look at the chores. And we made this list.
And like time
cleaning the kitty litter, 2 minutes.
No, they don't even
taking
get paid
out the
for
trash.
They don't get paid. Well, there are certain things
taking
they
out
don't
the
get
trash,
paid for it. I gotta
3 minutes. And so we lay it all out there. So now it's not how long it takes them to do it. It's how long we said it should take. And so they get to the end of the week and they've done 14 things and it times out to 38 minutes and they're like, wait a second.
I missed the dollar amount.
I used to get $14 and now I'm only getting 6. We're like, welcome to the real world.
But then that way it holds them accountable to what they do. But there are certain things they don't get paid to do. They just do as being a part of the family.
Yeah, and that's yeah.
But anyway, then, like Ethan knows he's got something coming up. He'll be like, I need to earn more money. And my mother, I mean, she can give you a list of chores longer than your, so we'll come up with a list. I said,
they have plenty of opportunity.
Knock out any of these. You can always earn more
to
money.
work us out of house and home. But, the other thing is I mentioned, we have the gift fund, but they also have that savings fund. And now that, they're getting paper money now, so it gets a little fuller. But that savings fund, that's their oops fund. If you've ever done Financial Peace, he talks about the baby steps, and one is building that, $1,000, emergency fund. Our kids don't have $1,000, but the idea is, and they've had to use this a time or two. Our son got an iPod a few years back, and he was so excited to take it to school, and he dropped it, and it cracked. And so we said, well, that's what you got your savings for. And so he paid to have the screen fixed. And bless his heart if he didn't take it back 2 days later and do the exact same thing again. And so, but
But this money won't mean anything to them if they don't see like when they go out with their friends, I never hand them money. You have money. If they go out with us, we pay for it. But anytime with their friends, they're on their own. And so they're seeing, as they like to do more and more stuff with their friends, they've got to take care of their money and save for different things.
When our daughter was learning to drive, and we were driving down, it was rainy. It rains a lot in Savannah, and she hit a curb, and it not only flattened the tire, but it dented the wheel. And she was so upset because we were late to school and it was raining, and Dad made her change the tire. This is how she learned it. But then she had to pay to have it repaired. And that was it was hard for me to do that, first of all. It was really hard for me to make her do that. But she did it. And she had to pay to replace the tail light on Julie's car. I mean, But you know what? That's why you have a savings. When you screw up, you pay for it. That's life.
All right, so Ecclesiastes 6, verse 1. I'm messing up. Verse 2. God gives some people wealth, possessions, and honor. They have everything their hearts desire, but God doesn't let them enjoy those things. Instead, strangers enjoy them. So just teaching that wealth comes from God, but it's not just for us. You need to take the wealth and always make sure you are being a blessing to others. Basically. And go ahead.
Verse 10 says, God has already planned what now exists. He has already decided what a human being is, and no one can argue with someone who's stronger. In other words, God's God, and you're not. He can make a person. You can't do that. So just encouraging kids to just look back and say, wow, how good is God? And one of the ways, it's just a super tangible thing, but I learned this a while back. Some guy told me a spiritual discipline he has is anytime he sees a penny on the ground, he picks it up. No amount of money is too small. And he says Jehovah Jireh, which is the Hebrew name for God that says God provides. And so I was like, I like that. And it was very embarrassing to our kids at first because they're like, every time Dad sees a penny, he picks it up. It doesn't matter. And I always say, Jehovah Jireh. It's just a reminder God provides for us. Even if it's just a penny on the ground, that's not going to give me anything, but it's a reminder. And so our kids, ever since that, have learned from a young age, they see money on the ground, they pick it up, they're going to say one thing, Jehovah Jireh. And, it's just a way of just reminding, God is that good to just remind me with a nickel. Or, man, if they see a quarter,
One
it
time
is.
you found a $20 bill.
I found a $20 bill in the parking lot on Black Friday. I was like, I'm going to have to get down on my knees for a few minutes here.
All right, verse 11 says, the more words people use, the less meaning there is, and that doesn't help anyone. Who knows what's good for a person? They live only for a few meaningless days. They pass through life like a shadow. Who can tell them what will happen on the earth after they are gone? So just knowing you don't always have to have all the answers for your kids, and really teaching them, okay, we don't have the answers. Let's look in the Word. Let's pray about it. And then let's, kind of what you guys were just talking about, let's look for how God's going to answer this. Teaching them to have eyes to look and see how God's going to answer those hard questions.
We're going to go right into chapter 7 here. But before we do, I want you to, there's a video I want you to watch. And it's just kind of interesting. And you're going to wonder, what in the world is this all about? But it's a video of a butterfly coming out of its chrysalis stage. And it's a time lapse, so it's moving along quickly. But I just want you to notice the amount of energy that is exerted by this butterfly. And you can go ahead and show that. Thanks. The movements that were having to happen, and it's just like, he's coming from something like this to something like this, and just even when he was fully out and those wings were still, kind of hanging straight down, and he's just work. And the time lapse kind of, helps you to see that he is really struggling and pushing, and there's a lot of stuff that's got to be developed there to get those wings ready to go so he can start flying, and that happened in a matter of a minute, which is what actually occurs over several hours' time for them to do that, and it is hard work on that poor butterfly. So it's a great intro to our next chapter, which is chapter 7, which is good advice about how to live. Now, we learned in chapters 5 and 6 that wealth is not what's best for us. And God teaches us in this chapter, hardship isn't what's worse for us. Verses 1 and 2 say, a good name is better than fine perfume, and people can learn more from mourning when someone dies than from being happy when someone is born. So it's better to go where people are mourning than to go where people are having a good time. Everybody will die someday. Those who are still living should really think about that, he says. Not being able to figure things out is better than laughter because sorrow is good for the heart. Hardship is not what's worst for us. Kids need to know that.
Verse 4 seems kind of counterintuitive. Those who are wise are found where there is sorrow, but foolish people are found where there is pleasure. Pay attention to a wise person's warning. That's better than listening to the songs of those who are foolish. basically, the wisdom that you're going to get in this life is going to come from those really hard times. And if we, and it's tempting as a parent, when you see a kid going through a hard time, it's really tempting to try and kind of pluck them out of it or save them from that pain. But if someone had just pulled that butterfly out of that chrysalis, they wouldn't have.
There's a story that was told about a guy who did this. He came along and saw a butterfly doing this and struggling, and he said, "Oh, that poor thing, I'm going to help it." And so it couldn't even get out of that little cocoon thing. And so he kind of pulls it out and sets it on the sidewalk to let it go free. And 2 seconds later, a bird swoops down and eats the butterfly.
Because it hadn't worked its wings to get the strength.
And the thing is, they have to go through that process of struggling to get ready. His wings weren't ready to fly yet. Otherwise, he could have gotten away from that bird. But if we take our kids out of a painful situation or a hard time, we're just setting them up for failure and destruction way worse than the hardship they're going through.
So it's necessary to work and to be disciplined and to take responsibility. And that's, I don't know about y'all, but it's hard for me to let my kids go through that sometimes.
But it's such an important thing for us to do to help them to learn from their pain. They're going to be experiencing pain throughout their whole life. It's a broken, fallen world, and it's not going to get any easier on the outside. So we got to help them know how to deal with it from the inside. So here's just some things that we have done that we think are good ways to kind of help them learn from unpleasantness or hardship or pain.
We've already talked about the chore charts. We do that just to hold them accountable to what they do. They have to check it off when they've done it, and then at the end of the week, they get paid. And
if they don't do it, they don't get
paid, but they still have to go back and do it. Another thing that's been really instrumental in our family is if you start it, you finish it. If you start a basketball season, you finish it. You don't quit anything in the middle. Honestly, God taught me this lesson when I went to get my master's. There were so many times and I was like, Lord, I think you just don't want me to finish. And he really put on my heart, there is not one account in the Bible of someone who started something and just decided to quit in the middle. Like, that is just not following with the heart of God. So unless there's like imminent danger for some reason to your child's life, I would make them stick it through. Our son decided this year, I'm going to do wrestling. Wrestling is, and we know nothing about wrestling, and we're like, that sounds great. Well, he's not the most athletic, and it was awful, y'all.
It was terrible.
He was terrible. The whole experience was terrible. Every time he went to practice, he just got slammed. And the really terrible thing was, starting the season, he was overweight. So he's in this class with these really big guys.
And they don't have an ounce of fat on their bodies.
But the big guys are the varsity ones. He's on JV, but he has to wrestle the varsity ones because they're the only ones in his weight class, and he just got slammed. Now, one of the good things that came out of it is he lost like 20 pounds doing this. But so many times he'd come to me and he'd say, Mom, I think God wants me to quit. I think he told me he wants me to quit. And I'd say, okay. And I'm like, knowing all along, there's no way you're quitting. But I'm trying not to assume. And so I'm like, okay, well, what was it in your Bible study? Like, how did you come to that? And he could never tell me, like, well, in this verse, the Lord let you know. He'd be like, oh, I don't know. So basically, we made him finish through the season, and it was awful. And I don't know. Obviously, it was probably harder on him, but it was pretty stinking hard on us because I didn't know wrestling matches were all day long on Saturday. And I was like, what? And just sitting through all those and doing all that. But he told me, I said, now, Ethan, looking back, can't you see it's been a really, what good things have you seen? He said, I can't, because we all have always made our kids exercise. So we have this elliptical, they have to ellipticize. And he goes, I can't believe I ever complained about the elliptical. He's like, that looks like a dream. And just knowing I hated it, it was hard, and God brought me through it. But if we had spared him from that, he wouldn't have learned that lesson, and it was a hard lesson.
And now he can't wait to get on that elliptical.
No, now he doesn't have to join next year, and he will not join next year, but he finished.
Another way is just this concept of reality discipline that we talked about, that Kevin Lehman talks about a lot, and just, finding those opportunities to say, okay, we're going to let the natural consequences of your bad decision be your punishment. I don't have to dole out the punishment. You're just going to, and that's a great way, because isn't that how we learn from our mistakes, is we have to deal with it? Another is, here is a book, and it's absolutely one of our favorites. It's called Spiritual Parenting, and this is another one that's one of the resources. I can't tell you what a great book this is. And
it will convict you as a Christian more than anything else.
If I don't tear it up. So Michelle Anthony, in writing this, I want to go through, she has what she calls environments, and that's basically just ways of teaching your kids different contexts in which you can teach your kids. She has one that she calls course correction. And this is kind of the way she looks at discipline. And she bases it all on one verse, Hebrews 12:13. And basically, well, I know what it says. It says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful for those who experience it. However, it will produce a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. And she says this is the basis of how we discipline our kids. There's a difference between discipline and punishment, you know? And so discipline has to be born out of that heart. It's not going to be pleasant for those who've been trained by it. And so kind of the three aspects of good discipline. When a kid just blows it, when they make a mistake, they break a rule, they do something they know is wrong, if you dissect that verse, you see that the three parts of God's discipline are pain, love, and level paths. There's got to be something about this discipline that hurts, because that's what's going to teach me I don't want to do this again. But then there's got to be love in it, which makes me realize that even in my sin, I am still loved. And this is so important that we teach kids this, because if all they ever hear is, I mess up, I get in trouble, I mess up, I get in trouble, then you do understand that the kid's best picture of God comes from their parents. That's how, when they look at you, this is how they're developing their image of who God is. And if they think that if my parents find out that I've messed up, then I'm going to get in trouble, then they're going to transfer that later on to say, if I do something wrong, God's going to get me, so I'm going to hide from him, and I'm not going to own my stuff. And so that's where the love comes in. And then the level path is just giving that kid a chance to re-earn some trust there. Real quick, I'll share a story with you about our son. There was a time a while back that we were working on a project at the church building, doing some work in the kitchen, remodeling the kitchen, and he was there to help me, and it was a big deal because he was like 7 years old. And the whole deal was, we're going to spend this time working on the kitchen and pulling out these cabinets and all this stuff, and we're going to work hard, and then at the end, there's going to be this family event where we're going to be watching a movie and eating pizza and all this fun stuff. And he was all about the movie and the pizza, but I was like, hey, we're going to work hard. So he comes and we're working, and he's not, and he's just totally slacking. And I'm like, hey, Eth, come help. And he would go, and he would help for a second and then go off. And, it was one of those times where I was getting frustrated because I was trying to get some stuff done, and he was there to help me, and he wasn't, and he was being more of a distraction than a help, and I had just had it. And I said, you're going to go sit in the office while we finish this up, because, and I said, and we're not, you haven't worked, you didn't earn this movie, you didn't earn this pizza, it's not going to happen. You're going to sit in the office while it's going on. And he was, needless to say, pretty dejected. And so I finished up what I needed to do, and I went to the office, and I said, we're going to have a talk about this. I'm not going to react out of the anger. But I said, hey, Eth, why are you sitting in here? He said, because I didn't obey, and I didn't help out. I said, okay. I said, and so what is the result of what's the punishment that you've earned for that? I don't get to eat pizza, I don't get to watch the movie. And I mean, he had little tears coming down his face, And I said, that's right. I said, so you understand the consequence of your actions? And he said, yes. I said, and God just flipped a switch in my head at that moment. I said, do you know what grace is? And he said, he didn't really have couldn't really take that. I said, grace is when God looks at us and says, I'm going to spare you from what your sin deserves. I said, have you ever heard the word justified? And he said, no. And I remember this little thing from when I was a kid. Justified means just as if I'd never sinned. I said, that means when I ask God for grace, he looks at me like the sin never happened. And he's like, yeah. I said, how would you like a little bit of, grace right now? And he's like, what? I said, how would you like to be justified right now? And he goes, what does that mean? I said, how would you like it if we just said, I'm going to extend grace, and it's just like you never disobeyed? And it was so stupid because it was a movie and pizza, but the kid got up, jumped across the room, and wrapped his arms around my neck, and he's never done this.
This is not something Rob usually does. So.
This is not something that Ethan does either. And he was just weeping and weeping. He was so happy. And I realized that was such an important moment because he realized in that moment what grace was. And I realized that's what this course correction stuff is all about. They're supposed to hurt. They're supposed to experience love. And then they're supposed to move on from it. And so just a really important thing. And that's just one of about 10 different environments that she talks about.
The whole
Super
point
good
of that
stuff.
book is creating a home where your kids have as many opportunities as possible to meet Jesus. And so she is awesome. It's a good book. All right, back to the chapter in verse 15. It says, in my meaningless life, here's what I've seen. I've seen godly people dying even though they are godly. I've seen sinful people living a long time even though they are sinful. Basically what comes out of this is kids figure out that everyone sins, and it's really important that we show them we know that we sin as well.
So yeah, we model humility for our kids by being vulnerable with them. And when we mess up, we have to say, I messed up and I'm sorry. That doesn't mean I have to go and dig up all the sins from my past, but like when I have sinned against my child, I need to tell them that.
It goes a long
They're
way.
never going to really believe me about how humble they need to be if I don't show them. And so I do that. I just have to say, I need you to forgive me. And that's one thing that is dynamic in my relationship with Ethan. He told Julie, he said, I don't feel like Dad ever apologizes for stuff. And so I have to do that. I have to go there and say, hey, you know what? I'm really sorry that I yelled at you, or I'm really sorry that I assumed something, and maybe it was a little harsher than I needed to be. But it just comes back to that idea of course correction as well. Sometimes the best thing we can do, because kids are learning that we sin, they sin, everybody sins, is we can just shock them with grace, just shock them. Because do you remember the first time you realized that Jesus had absolutely wiped out every sin you had ever done, and it didn't matter what you did? Nothing you could do would be so bad that it would make him stop loving you. Do you remember just that feeling? David says in one of the Psalms, he says, restore to me the joy of my salvation, that moment of realizing, I'm okay. I'm free from whatever that is. And what a beautiful thing to be able to model that, to be able to replicate that in our relationship with our kids. If they're getting their concept of who God is through you as their parent, then how great for them to have that moment of saying, I'm going to extend grace to you that will be shocking to you. That doesn't mean we don't ever have accountability. That doesn't mean that you get away with stuff. But I'm going to give you grace. And you're going to experience, wow, they don't hate me. They're not trying to get me. They're not trying to make my life miserable, which is the first thing they go to. So that is all of that's all of session 2 anyway, which is the longest one. Don't worry, all the others are much, much shorter. But it was about 5 chapters of Ecclesiastes we go through. And so now this is a good time to just go through some questions, anything you'll have, or just comments or anything that any of that has brought up for you.
Struck you or...
This is what we're here for.
Is the Spirit speaking to anyone in any way that you feel like you need to do with your own kids, or any ahas, or I need to work on that, or anything like that?
I think you're wrong.
Don't look at me.
You worry about giving your kids too much.
Like materialistically?
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, what about giving them? I mean, I try not to give them too much. I mean, I guess it's.
I think a lot of it, we kind of have laid down an expectation for the kids that they're not going to have as much as their friends or as other kids or as they see on TV or on YouTube or whatever.
That's the basis of comparison. Compared to
Yeah.
some kids, they have a lot more, but
Yeah.
compared to others, they don't.
And really doing everything we can to foster a spirit of generosity in them, I think is one of the best things we can do for that, because if we do look back and go, we probably shouldn't have done that, it's probably more than they need. If we can still encourage them to be generous with it, because I think that's an important thing. Something I didn't really mention earlier is kids, we talk about stewardship a lot, and in kids ministry we talk about that a lot with kids, and they see that there is this disparity between what we have like in this country and what kids in other countries have. And we put that in front of the kids all the time at our church, because all of their offerings are going to support a ministry in Zimbabwe. And they realize those kids they don't have anything. And so we talk about that. We say, why do you think God has given you so much and these kids so little? And a lot of times they're like, I don't know, that doesn't even make sense. And if we can kind of, give them the context of, well, maybe God isn't just flailing stuff around randomly. Maybe he's doing it for a reason. Maybe he knows that person's going to be on your heart. Maybe he trusts you to somehow be a blessing to someone else. And so the abundance of what you have is intentional, so that you can use it to be a blessing to someone else. Because we see all throughout Scripture that message is consistent. And if and if you're not going to use that to be faithful and bless someone else, then, you look at the parable of the talents. You might not be able to hang on to it forever. God's favor may not continue to shower upon you. And so, if we have, ever felt like, man, maybe we did overindulge on something, just kind of saying, hey, let's see how we can, maybe you don't need these other things now. How can we find a place for them? And we try to, not that we don't like goodwill or anything, but instead of just shuffling off in one place, let's be very intentional about this. Who could we bless with this thing now that,
And each different kid is going to have a different heart with it, and you just kind of got to look at the pulse of that and say, is this kid feeling entitled? What do I, maybe I need to pull back. Maybe they need to do a little more service. Maybe they need to work a little harder. Just kind of gauge each one.
And if you really blow it, then I think a great thing to do is just go, hey, we kind of were paying you up in advance for some stuff some expectations we're gonna have for you to really work some stuff off here, because there's nothing wrong with kids learning. They got to earn their keep.
With our son, at one point, we had to literally strip everything out of his room and literally turn the chest of drawers around and give him one outfit at a time and be like,
prison treatment.
He was just not doing well for his teacher at school at all, and just entitled in his attitude. And so we just kind of had to go back to the basics, and then with trust, let him build back up.
Yeah.
I don't know. Some people might think that's too extreme.
I was almost looking forward to if he blew it again, because I was going to take the door off the hinges. So it's like you don't even get privacy now.
Mm-hmm. I think he was in third grade when we did
Oh,
that.
I think he was second.
What are your thoughts about sort of the best way to lay that foundation of respect, obedience, trust? Because I feel like that looks a little bit different for a 3-year-old
Sure.
than it does for a 15-year-old.
Mhm.
They want to be when they're 15, and there's certain things that maybe we should be trying to do with our young kids as far as and I mean the basic things, obedience or just boundaries, control, all that. What are your, now that you're sort of past the first phase of laying that groundwork,
That was all.
what do you think's important for us to do with our young kids,
Mhm.
just kind of practically, as far as what they want to do?
Yeah. I think just the consistency of parameters and it's hard because this may not even be in your personality type to do this, but just going, we've just got to be very consistent about what the expectation is of the behavior. And from a very young age, they can understand, okay, this is what they don't need to know why necessarily from a young age, because they probably can't process that yet, but just this is what's expected of me. No, when someone gives you something, we say thank you. You make eye contact with look at me in the eyes. I just heard Jeff say, look at my eyes with your eyes to his little girl today, and that's just a reminder of that exact thing. Just teaching them those very simple things in a very straightforward, almost clinical way, so that it's completely devoid of emotion, so they're not associating it with I'm in trouble here, and being overly regimented with that, and modeling it with each other. I don't normally say thank you, ma'am, to Julie when she and I are just talking, but if it's when we're in front of the kids, and that's also another really important thing, is the two of you being a united front in front of the kids, because there is nothing that can cause more friction between the parents than a different approach to how the kids are going to do stuff. And I would say the best thing is for you to talk about it in advance and strategize. Okay, let's talk about what the priorities are for our kid right now, these behaviors that we want them to have, and let's just make sure that we agree on those things, so that if one of us is in the room, we're not giving them these inconsistent kinds of things.
Everything you're doing now is like you're in that season of you're building these parameters, and if you are consistent and if you give the consequences you say you're going to give, and you do that all the time, when they get older, your life is going to be so much easier. But right now, it is a pain and it is hard. But you're a teacher, when they're doing it right, praise them. That goes so far, that verbal praise around the dinner table. Look, today I saw this, this, and this, and I loved it, and it just blessed me. God blessed me through you every time you obey today. I remember Cam one time said, if your kid cannot obey you, who they can see, why in the world are they going to obey a God they can't see? And that struck me so hard in just really the whole immediate obedience. Delayed obedience is disobedience. And that whole have a new kid by Friday really helps with that one, and just nip it in the bud, and just and being responsive, not reactive. Just
Yeah. Kevin Lehman says don't give warnings. You know, if it's something they know they're supposed to do, you know, he lays out the scenario. We're going to go to the grocery store. We don't need to have the discourse in the car before we go in. All right, now when we go in there, I don't want you throwing a fit. I don't want you grabbing stuff you're not supposed to.
They know.
They know what they're not supposed to do. And if they start doing that stuff, you just turn around and walk out. You know, I mean, even from a young age, you don't throw stuff. You know, we don't. I remember Emma was 8 months, Olive Garden. I don't know. She was very, very young, and I mean, not even a year old. And she was grabbing food and dropping it on the floor. And it was the kind of thing where it's like, she knew what she was doing, because we'd say, don't do it. She would look at us and do it. And that's, I like James Dobson's sort of definition of defiance is when they look you in the eye and do what they know is wrong. Then that is defiance. And so she was really young, but I gave her a little, like that on her hand. And Julie was like, ooh. And I was like, she knows what she's doing. And you know what? I didn't have to do that again. Mm-mm. She quit. She didn't drop food anymore, But it's that little game that they play, And
people think their kids are so smart, and then when it comes to discipline, they're like, well, I don't know if they understand. Yeah. They understand. They know completely.
Yeah, they do. And there's different developmental stages where they can understand on different levels. But yeah, just laying that down, and yeah, it's the expectations you lay out and follow are what you're going to get.
Have you done anything that seems really worked well? I mean, it's just going to be a constant struggle because they're constantly looking for those boundaries.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, I think we should, I don't know, we probably still do this, but I think that we talked about this before, none of it's rocket science. It just seems like all of the,
Yep.
proximity, like you're so far away,
Mm-hmm. Just look at each other and say, it's a season. It's going to pass.
Yeah. Yep. The first house we moved to in Georgia, it's the first time the kids' rooms were upstairs and ours were not. And so we'd hear stuff going on up there and be like, okay, we got to go upstairs.
Do you guys ever watch Malcolm in the Middle? Have you ever seen that show? Okay, so they have a clip at the beginning, and the mom and the dad are asleep in bed, and the boys are just fighting, and the mom opens her eyes, and the dad's like this. Then she closes her eyes, and the dad opens his eyes, and the mom's like this. So they kind of do that back and forth. The dad goes, okay, I'll go, but when I come back, you better be naked. That is just like, it just sums it all up. It's like no one wants to go deal with that.
That only works on a sitcom, though, by the way.
I love that. Some of those things sit with you. But yeah.
All right. Shall we go ahead and break for lunch, and then we'll come back and we'll
Finish this out.
wrap it up?
Before we break for lunch, though, Steve Peters here, so I want to give you the next talk. He's letting you guys know he's starting up Young Life here.
Sweet.
Cool.